What if the reason you cannot lose that stubborn belly fat has nothing to do with how hard you train, how clean you eat, or how disciplined you think you are? What if the real decision, the one that determines whether your body burns visceral fat or locks it away, happens silently, automatically, in the first 90 minutes after you open your eyes? Not in the gym, not at the dinner table, in your bedroom, before you've done a single thing. That is not a metaphor. That is biology. And once you understand it, everything you thought you knew about fat loss is going to shift. This is not another video about cutting carbs, doing more cardio, or waking up at 5 in the morning to punish yourself into a smaller waistline. This is about something far more precise and far more powerful. Morning biology. The narrow window of time when your body quietly makes a set of hormonal decisions that will govern your metabolism for the rest of the day. Most people walk right through that window without realizing it exists, and in doing so, they accidentally send their body into fat storage mode before breakfast, before coffee, before a single choice has been made. If you have ever felt like you are doing everything right and still not seeing results around your midsection, this is the explanation you have been missing. Visceral belly fat is unlike fat stored elsewhere in the body. It sits deep inside the abdominal cavity, wrapping around your organs, and it is extraordinarily sensitive to one hormone above all others: cortisol. Not insulin alone, not calories alone, cortisol. When cortisol is chronically elevated, visceral fat does not just resist being burned. It actively grows because the body is using it as a strategic energy reserve for what it perceives as an ongoing threat. This is ancient survival biology running in a modern body. And the tragedy is that most of what we do in the morning, the things we think are helping us, are actually triggering exactly this cortisol response. We are accidentally telling our bodies there is danger before the day has even begun. To understand why the morning carries such enormous biological weight, you have to understand what your body is actually doing when you wake up. After a full night of sleep, you are not in a neutral rested state. You are dehydrated. You have lost water through breathing, through skin, through the metabolic processes that continued all night long. Your blood has become more viscous, your circulation is under greater strain, and your adrenal glands, the small organs responsible for cortisol production, are primed and highly sensitive. At the same time, your autonomic nervous system enters what can best be described as an environmental assessment phase. This is ancient. This is wired deep into human biology. Your brain is not asking whether you are motivated today. It is asking one single question: is the environment safe? The answer to that question, shaped entirely by the signals it receives in the next 90 minutes, determines whether your body burns fat or stores it. That is the morning biological window.
And everything depends on what signals you send during it.
Here is the truth that changes everything. Your body is not stubborn. It is not broken. It is not working against you. It is responding with complete biological logic to the signals it is receiving. And that means the solution is not more force. It is different signals. It is learning to speak the language your body actually responds to in the morning, the language of safety. When the body feels safe, visceral fat is not a fortress to be stormed. It becomes fuel the body is willing and able to use. You do not fight your way to fat loss. You earn it through cooperation with your own biology. And that begins with the very first thing you do after waking. Before coffee, before your phone, before movement of any kind. Water and minerals. This is the most foundational safety signal you can send to your body in the morning. And it is also the most consistently underestimated. After hours of sleep, your cells are asking for resources. Blood volume is low. Electrolyte levels have dropped. The body is measuring availability. How much is there? How much do we have to work with? And if the answer comes back as scarcity, cortisol rises to compensate. This is not stress in the emotional sense. This is physiological stress, a resource signal interpreted as a threat. And the adrenal glands respond accordingly, elevating cortisol to conserve energy and protect what little remains. This is why so many people wake up feeling tense, wired, or vaguely anxious before anything stressful has even happened. Their body has already entered a low-level state of alarm simply from overnight depletion.
Water alone begins to address this, but it is often not enough. Without minerals, the body may continue to hold cortisol elevated to protect electrolyte balance. This is where a pinch of high-quality salt, sea salt or Himalayan salt, becomes something far more meaningful than a flavor choice. Sodium, in this context, is a biological signal. When the body detects it, a cascade of downregulation begins. The renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system relaxes. Adrenaline softens. The adrenal glands receive the message that resources are available and that heightened alarm is no longer necessary. Adding fresh lemon to that water is not about vague detoxification myths. Lemon provides potassium, which works in direct partnership with sodium to complete the electrolyte signal. Together, sodium and potassium send the autonomic nervous system one clear message: stability, safety, enough. When this message is received, cortisol begins its natural downward arc. Abdominal tension eases, heart rate steadies, the mind slows, and most critically, fat storage enzymes that would otherwise remain activated begin to stand down. This is the first step toward unlocking visceral fat, not through force, but through resource reassurance. This simple act, done first and done correctly, creates the biological foundation without which everything else in the morning routine becomes either ineffective or actively counterproductive.
Once the body has been hydrated and the minerals are in place, the next signal must come from outside: light, specifically natural morning sunlight. The human body runs on a 24-hour biological clock, and that clock is not wound by motivation or intention. It is wound by light. Without the correct light input at the correct time, hormones like cortisol, insulin, and melatonin lose their rhythm. They become disordered, mistimed, and the body loses its ability to clearly distinguish when to be alert and when to recover. Visceral fat is exquisitely sensitive to this disorder. When cortisol has no clean peak and no clean fall, when it just lingers at a moderate elevation all day, it sends a continuous fat storage signal to the deep abdominal tissue. The body never gets a clear message that the threat has passed. Stepping outside within 5 to 10 minutes of waking, without sunglasses blocking the spectral quality of the light, allows retinal cells to transmit a signal directly to the hypothalamus, the brain's master hormonal control center. The brain receives the clearest possible message: it is morning, The day has begun. This is the time for activity and alertness. This triggers a sharp, healthy cortisol peak, the kind that is meant to happen, the kind that wakes you fully and then, crucially, falls decisively once its job is complete. Morning sunlight is also the upstream trigger for serotonin production, which later converts into melatonin at night. The light you receive at 7 in the morning is literally programming the quality of your sleep 12 to 15 hours later. And sleep matters for visceral fat not as a passive recovery state, but as the window during which cortisol regulation for the following day is established.
Poor sleep means disordered cortisol. Disordered cortisol means continued fat storage. The entire cycle feeds itself. Morning sunlight is the intervention point that can interrupt it. You do not need to stare at the sun. You do not need to be out for an hour. You need to allow natural outdoor light into your visual field for a few minutes, consistently, before screens have a chance to confuse the signal. Even on overcast days, outdoor light is dramatically more powerful than any indoor lighting. This is not exercise. It requires no effort. It is simply the act of receiving information your biology has relied on for the entire span of human existence. Now the body is hydrated. It has received its light orientation. And here is where most people make a mistake they have been making every single day without realizing the downstream consequences. They drink their coffee. And there is nothing inherently wrong with coffee. Coffee is not the enemy. But timing is everything. And the timing of caffeine in relation to your nervous system's natural waking sequence changes its entire effect. When you first wake up, a molecule called adenosine, which builds up in the brain during wakefulness and creates sleep pressure, is still present at meaningful levels. The brain's own clearance process for adenosine takes roughly 60 to 90 minutes to complete after waking. Caffeine does not clear adenosine. It blocks the receptors that detect it, creating the sensation of alertness without the underlying reality. The biological transition from sleep to full wakefulness is interrupted rather than supported. When caffeine blocks adenosine receptors too early, the adenosine continues to accumulate behind that blockade. Later in the day, when caffeine's effects wear off, that built-up adenosine floods the system all at once. This is the afternoon crash, not a sign of low willpower, but a predictable pharmacological outcome of drinking coffee too early. The body responds to this energy collapse the way it responds to any perceived stress. Cortisol rises to compensate. This creates the familiar mid-afternoon cortisol spike that brings with it tension, irritability, anxiety, and cravings, not for real nutrition, but for fast sugar, fast dopamine, fast relief. Blood glucose spikes, insulin surges, and that energy is deposited precisely where cortisol is directing it, visceral fat. The entire cascade began not at 2 in the afternoon, but at 7 in the morning, with 1 cup of coffee taken too soon. By waiting 90 minutes before the first cup, you allow adenosine to clear naturally. The cortisol awakening response completes its full cycle. When you finally introduce caffeine, it enhances an already alert and stable system rather than trying to force alertness on an unprepared one. Morning energy becomes smooth, afternoon crashes disappear, cortisol stays regulated, sugar cravings fade. The coffee becomes a performance tool rather than a dependency. With the body now hydrated, light-oriented, and caffeine withheld, the fourth signal is movement, but not the kind that most people associate with fat loss. The instinct when trying to burn belly fat is to go harder. HIIT, sprints, intense cardio, anything that burns maximum calories in minimum time. And while that kind of training has its place is not in the morning biological window, especially not in a body already carrying chronic stress signals and visceral fat. High-intensity exercise in the morning, before safety has been established, does not send the body a fat-burning signal. It sends a survival signal. Rapid heart rate, heavy breathing, lactate accumulation, temporary oxygen debt. To the primitive brain, these are the sensations of fleeing danger. When this arrives during the morning assessment window, cortisol does not fall, it spikes. Visceral fat, with its dense concentration of cortisol receptors, receives the instruction clearly: lock down, store, protect. The paradox is real, and it is important. Trying harder to burn fat early in the morning can make it harder for the body to release fat at all. What works instead is slow walking. Not as a compromise or a lesser option, but as a precisely targeted nervous system signal. Calm, easy walking at a pace that allows full, comfortable breathing is one of the oldest safety signals in human biology. Evolutionary history has encoded this pattern into the nervous system. Calm, forward movement at an easy pace meant no immediate danger. The predator was not close. The environment was navigable. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, relaxes in response to this movement, and the mechanism is specific. It is called optic flow. As you walk forward, the visual environment moves steadily across your field of view. This continuous visual motion has been shown in neuroscience research to directly calm amygdala activity. It is not the exertion that lowers cortisol. It is the visual information telling the threat detection system that all is well, that you are moving through a safe world at a safe pace. 10 to 15 minutes is sufficient. The goal is not calorie burn. It is nervous system regulation. When this signal is received, cortisol drops, insulin sensitivity improves, leptin signaling normalizes, and the fat storage enzymes that have been holding visceral fat in reserve begin to deactivate. Many people notice after establishing this habit that their appetite naturally decreases, that afternoon sugar cravings become less insistent, that energy levels through the day feel more stable, not because they ate less or trained harder, but because the biological baseline has shifted. The fifth and final signal is perhaps the hardest to implement in a world that has made the phone an extension of the hand. Not using your phone for the first 30 minutes after waking. Not as a spiritual practice or a productivity hack, but as a direct protective measure for the nervous system during its most programmable and most vulnerable window. When you first wake, the brain has not yet fully transitioned into daytime mode. The parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest, digestion, and safety, is still dominant. This is a state of biological openness. Safety signals received during this state are absorbed deeply and set the tone for the entire day. But this openness works in both directions. The moment a phone screen activates, the brain is hit simultaneously with dopamine from novelty and cortisol from reaction, urgency, and comparison. The sympathetic nervous system activates before hydration, light, and movement have had a chance to establish stability. Fight or flight is triggered in a body that was just on the edge of true morning calm. Cortisol stops following its natural rhythm. It becomes prolonged, defensive. The body locks down. And you feel none of this happening consciously. You feel busy, engaged, productive, while underneath, the biology has already shifted into conservation mode. Protecting those first 30 minutes means allowing the earlier 4 signals to fully integrate without disruption. Parasympathetic tone strengthens. Heart rate stabilizes. Breathing deepens. The gut-brain communication that governs appetite and satiety begins its proper cycle. Cortisol falls naturally rather than being pulled back upward by external stressors. The internal environment settles into exactly the state where the body finally feels safe enough to release what it has been protecting. When the body feels that safety, visceral fat shifts from being a locked emergency reserve into accessible energy. Not energy you demand, energy the body willingly offers. What happens when you bring all 5 signals together? Hydration and minerals, morning sunlight, delayed caffeine, slow walking, and protected attention is not dramatic in any single moment. It does not feel like transformation while it is happening. It feels like a morning that is quieter, gentler, and more grounded than the mornings before it. But the biological reality underneath that quiet is significant. Cortisol rises when it is meant to, falls when the job is done, and does not linger. The fat storage enzyme lipoprotein lipase remains inactive. Visceral fat, no longer needed as a survival reserve, becomes available as fuel. Hunger decreases, not from restriction, but because satiety hormones are finally being heard correctly. Afternoon cravings diminish because there is no cortisol spike demanding fast sugar for emergency energy.
Total caloric intake often falls naturally, not through willpower, but because the biological drivers of unnecessary eating have been addressed at their source.
There is no punishment in this. There is no battle. There is no moment where you have to override your body with sheer force of character. Your body is not the obstacle. It never was. It is the system, and like any system, it responds to the inputs it receives. Stress signals, the wrong light, the wrong timing, the wrong kind of morning intensity produce a stress response. Chronic stress response produces visceral fat. Safety signals produce the opposite. When the morning becomes a sequence of genuine reassurance to the nervous system, the body stops defending that deep abdominal tissue and starts using it. Not because you finally found the discipline, because you finally sent the right message. Your body has been responding perfectly to everything you have been giving it. Now, give it something different. Give it safety first. Everything else follows.